one of the things I wanted to pick your brain about, because I feel like some people get hung up on this idea with Stoicism, is this sort of balance between fate and free will. Because, obviously you hear this idea of fate and providence. And I think the thing that people get hung up on is they see Stoicism, and obviously Stoicism is all about behavioral changes. It's all about changing what you can do and your own actions. And I think there's this confusion on how any form of free will can be included in the grand idea of fate and providence. And so, like, how do you reconcile those two seemingly opposing views between fate and free will, which is, to be fair, a huge debate even today? Academics are still debating this, right? Like, how does that reconciled in Stoicism?
Well, I'll tell you, when I went through the Marcus Aurelius school at the College of Stoic Philosophers, this was the part that is the hardest to grasp. And I would be kidding you if I said, yeah, I've got it all figured out. But there are some things that help me to, I guess, accept two what appear to be contradictory ideas. The Stoics said, first of all, the world is teleological and it is determined. And then at the same time, they said, we are morally responsible. Now, when we try to pattern that out logically, we say, well, if my behavior is determined, then how can I be responsible for it, right? And there's an apparent conflict there. So when you step back from that, and then let's bring in Stoic physics into this. Let's bring in the concept that that the entire cosmos is an organism, and that the entire cosmos is everything in it, everything that exists is a combination of logos and matter, or pneuma and matter. But pneuma is spirit, but everything is a piece of, it's all God, and everything has a piece of God and a piece of what we would call matter combined in it for it to be a body and allow it to act or be acted upon. So if everything in the universe or the cosmos is comprised of the same things and we're all interconnected, and then there's another concept that the Stoics talked about, and that is co-fate. Over and over again, we see both Epictetus and Seneca talk about the God within. Well, what is the God within for Stoics? It's not a supernatural soul, but what it is it's a configuration of the pneuma in each of us, which is that portion of the divine that exists within each of us. So I'm an agent. I as a human being am an agent operating in the cosmos. The cosmos is an agent. And so anything that happens in my life is co-fated. I am operating with the cosmos in order to make things happen. And the freedom that we do have is the freedom to make choices. And we can argue about exactly what that means, but it's the Epictetus is talking about the proeresis, the rational faculty, and says that even Zeus can't override that. That's a power that we have. And of course, he's using Zeus as a combination, a term for God as a whole. But nature, God, can't override our freedom of choice. So in some way, we do have, and I think we make the mistake of calling it free will, because there really is no free will. I mean, I don't get to just choose whatever I want, right? Mm-hmm. I'm 5'9". I couldn't choose to be an NBA basketball player no matter how much I tried, and I can't jump. So, and I'm also not going to be a lineman on an NFL football team. So that is not a choice that I have. There are some choices that I am limited in the choices that I can make throughout my life. And in every instance, I'm limited by the choices that I can make. Now, what is also true is that each of us has Chrysippus talked about our character being either a cylinder or a top. So in other words, if you roll a cylinder down a particular hill, it's going to roll the way it's going to roll based upon its shape. If you spin a top, that top is going to spin based upon its shape. Well, that shape is a metaphor for the character, our moral character. So what is he saying here? Chrysippus is saying that if you push two different cylinders down the exact same hill and their shape is different, they're going to roll differently, right? That's us. So my character, when I face a particular impression in a particular set of circumstances, I'm going to respond to that in a given way based upon the way my character existed at that moment in time. That's how I'm going to react to that, because that was who I was. Now, I believe that there are two things that can be done here. Is that one, we've already talked about. After my character rolled down that hill, I could stop and say, man, that was a bumpy ride. I think I need to smooth some edges off here so that the next time that same impression gives me that little push, because that's what the impression does. It's a force, that acts upon us from the outside. I'm going to roll in a more appropriate way. Mm-hmm. So I have some control, but can I choose not to be pushed? No, the push is there. The push is an external force, but my character is going to determine how I respond to that push. When we say free will, we could almost imply, well, I want the push to take me left or right, or I want it to go over the backside of the hill. We don't have that amount of freedom. And some, I think, can reasonably argue, even from a Stoic perspective, that at that particular time, you don't even have the freedom to choose. You're just going to react. But I don't agree with that. I think that the difference between, even in Stoicism, but we see it in modern science in terms of the difference between animals and humans, is that we do have the ability to say, even after we receive that initial impulse, because to react a certain way. Example, someone comes up to me and slaps me across the face. It's arguably a human reaction to turn around and slap him back, right? Mm. Something has trained me to not do that. If you take two 2-year-olds and you put them together and one hits one of them, the other one is either going to hit them back or they're going to cry. But right. Oftentimes they might hit back, and they have to be told and trained, don't hit. That's not an appropriate act. Well, in time, they grow into adults, and hopefully when someone says something mean to them or someone pushes them, they don't turn around and do something completely inappropriate. I will tell you, in my profession, in law enforcement, I can't tell you how many times, well, why did you shoot the guy? Well, he disrespected me. Now we look at that and we say, that's insane. Mm. But their character, in the way that they have developed as a human being, it makes perfect sense that if someone disrespects me, I'm going to shoot them or stab them or maybe just knock their teeth out. But that is a learned behavior, right? So right. we have the opportunity, and I think free will comes down to just that. It's realizing that I am a co-creator. Anything that happens is not something, life is not happening to me. Impressions are happening to me, and life is happening within, because I get to make those choices from within. But I wish I could tell you, this is the simple formula for understanding Stoic determinism, but it doesn't exist. You really have to learn to live in it, and sometimes it makes sense to you, and sometimes it doesn't.
It is really complicated. I have an analogy that I developed years ago. I was journaling one day and I came up with this. I'll be interested to know what you think about it. So I've been thinking about this, and it's interesting you mentioned about how we each have our own sort of individual strengths and weaknesses, right? You mentioned basketball might not be yours. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting because, we talk about equality of opportunity, and that's a worthy goal. But it sort of came to me, I guess, sometime last year when I was really thinking about it, that it's a worthy goal, but we still can't really attain that because we each do have individual strengths and individual weaknesses. Okay, because I don't have the same opportunity as someone who is much taller than me for basketball, for a particular thing. And in fact, I guess sort of the realization I came to was that, that's whatever is different about you, whatever is unique about you, whatever is unequal about you, like that's what you have to offer to the world. That's particularly what you have to offer to the world. And so it's, again, I think we should move towards equality of opportunity as a society, but at the same time, it's impossible, for one, unless we're all copy-paste of each other, which would create a boring world. And two, what are you going to offer to the world if it's not some part of your inequality, if it's not something that is different about you? And arguably, that's what you're doing when you go get a degree or when you learn or when you develop your character. Like you're trying to put your own spark on things. I know I got a little off topic. I wanted to bring up this analogy. So I imagine a boat. Now I come from a fishing family, so maybe that's where this came from. But I imagine a boat, a sailboat, basic. You have a rudder, you have a sail. Okay, so that's pretty much what you have available to you in terms of navigation. Now, what you don't have, and I sort of feel like this is something like fate. What you can't control is the wind, and you can't control the waves either. What's interesting about sailing is that you can actually go in any direction you want. And a lot of people that haven't sailed, they don't understand this, but it's a really simple concept. If you go, the best way you can possibly go sailing is with the wind. Wind at your sails. That's where the phrase came from. Wind at your sails, right? Go straight. But you can go sideways as well. And you can actually go directly against the wind if you zigzag, right? So
Tacking.
Yeah, exactly. So what's interesting, unless you do what we do, is we just we sail one way and then we row back the other way in our little rowboat. But if you think about that, that's really interesting to me, because I feel like in many ways, as you mentioned, I sort of feel like going with the wind, that's sort of developing your character in that positive way. And you can go the opposite way if you want, or you can go against the wind. You can make it as rough as you possibly would like in life in general, right? But the question is, like, what's going to be, in your words, the best way to sail more appropriately given the weather conditions, right? What do you think of that analogy?
Yeah, I like the analogy if you're careful with it. And by that I mean, I think you have to avoid putting into the analogy that I should be going with the wind or against the wind. That's the only part of that I'm a little bit nervous about, because there are some people that take Stoicism and the concept that the obstacle is the way. That means that Stoicism is all about looking for obstacles and overcoming obstacles. That's not what Stoicism is about. So sometimes the winds are going to be in favor, and sometimes they're not. That's I have a blog post titled "The Winds of Fortuna," and Seneca talks a lot about this. And so the idea is, if you're sailing, you have a goal in mind, right? You have a destination that you're trying to reach. And sometimes when you're trying to reach that destination, the wind might be at your back. You might wind in your sails. And the next day, the wind may be trying to blow you into the rocks. And the wind might be trying to blow you off course. The wind might be coming directly at you. The point is, the destination, the goal, which in our case is virtue, right? Arete, excellence of character. As long as our boat is consistently aimed at that goal, then fortuna is just the things that happen that are maybe challenges, and sometimes they may not. Like some days I may have the wind at my back, and some days it may be in my, but my goal has to remain the same. I have a direction I'm heading toward, the goal of arete, of virtue.
Yeah.
But see, we tend to want the wind at our back all the times, which kind of ties into the idea of equality. In fact, my next episode of Stoicism on Fire, I'm dealing with Enchiridion 17, where Epictetus talks about, he uses the metaphor of life as a play, and that each of us are assigned a role, and we don't get to pick the role. We're assigned a role, and by God, by the cosmos. So, well, how are we assigned a role? Well, you're assigned a role by, again, I was born a 5'9" guy that can't jump. Okay, so that's part of my role. That's not my whole role, but that biological fact about me limits what I can do in life. But at the same time, I have other things that maybe open doors for me. So once again, if a tragedy occurs in your life, what is an apparent tragedy? The question is this a door opening for me? And that's where again, we tie back into the concept of providence and Seneca's idea of fortuna. The wind can't harm me. Even if it blows my boat onto the rocks, it's not harming me. It may be destroying my boat, and I may have to build another boat, but I still have the same goal in mind. And I can still be a person of solid character while I'm rebuilding my boat and setting back out for the course that I originally intended to aim at, right? So
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
those-
Yeah. No, that's a great point. The way I think I thought about it in a little bit in the past was sort of like you talked about how we each have our own sort of individual strengths and weaknesses. And so,
Sorry,
like, okay.
Brandon, I don't want to interrupt you, but I wanted to point out something before you went because I thought of it earlier. There are
Yeah.
actually three different natures in Stoicism. There's nature as a whole, there's human nature as a whole, and then there's your individual nature. And I think sometimes
Right.
we forget that third piece, which is, and that's what we're talking about now, your
Right.
role, who you are, that is your individual nature. And we are not all the same. We're not all created the same.
Yeah, and that's really well put, and that's exactly how I think about this boat analogy. Because, again, for me, one of the ways for me to be aligned personally with my character, I think, is pretty much what I'm doing now. I'm really into philosophy. I have the podcast going on. I have strength sports and strength coaching and a bit of engineering and that stuff. That's very well aligned with my personal nature. However, it's not that I couldn't pursue basketball as a career. You're 5'9", I'm 5'7". It's not that I couldn't pursue basketball as a career. I could, but I'd be going against the wind in many ways, right?